You got it in front of you. Recording in progress. That's one of the things I'm going to say. This meeting is being recorded for. Will it be transmitted, or does somebody ask for it to be, or what?
It's uploaded to the website.
It'll go on the website. When will that be, Angela? Do you know?
This afternoon.
This afternoon. All right. Okay. I have various formalities and notes to read out at the beginning, but before we do, we'll go around and make sure everybody's technology is working. So if you press the bottom left button on the little set of buttons in front of you, it should light up and you should briefly come on screen there. Oh, God. So we're going to go around one by one. I don't know how it works. Everybody press at the same time. Right. And when you've pressed it, cease to press it, and then somebody else do it. We'll start on the left. Jeff, come on.
There we go.
Yeah. What's your name?
I'm Councillor Jeff Winnard. I'm a Bradford councillor and deputy chairman of this committee.
Mike Barnes, Calderdale, and this is the first time I've been on this committee. So, hello everyone.
Andrew Cooper, Kirklees.
Mel Stephen, also from Kirklees.
Jane Dowson, Leeds.
Jacob Goddard, Leeds.
Good morning, Jeanette Sunderland from Bradford.
It is, thank you. Good morning, Angela Taylor, Director Corporate Commercial Services for the Combined Authority.
Good morning, Councillor Carol Thurkill from Bradford.
Good morning, Tony Homewood from Wakefield.
Morning, Paul Davis, Kirklees.
Everything's working, thank you. Betty, Councillor Rhodes has rung with her apologies. She's not well. And Councillor Robinson from Calderdale is on his way. He's going to be here, but we are quorate, are we not? Very satisfactory. Right, we'll go through the first 3 or 4 things on the agenda, the formalities. I say I have 1 or 2 things I want to say. Apologies for absence. We have 1 or 2 formal apologies, have we?
We've got apologies from Councillor David Jones, who's in Ofsted meeting. Councillor Rhodes has just said Councillor Melly sent her apologies. And as mentioned, Councillor Swift and Robinson are just running a bit late, but they should be here.
Declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests. Does anybody any speak now? Thank you. Possible exclusion of the press and public. I don't think that's appropriate. No. We'll take my little. No, we'll do the next bit first. The notes of the meeting in September, which was not quite. Anybody comments to make of those which won't crop up anywhere later in the meeting when we listening to them there? Any comments on page 1?
I don't know which page it's on because I've not got them in front of me, but thank you for sorting out the substitute place for the Green Party. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm quite happy to take the credit, but I did nothing to do with it. I didn't do with it at all. Page 2. See, quite a lot of these things are going to crop up when Mayor Brabin is with us. Page 3. Page 4. No, right. But some items there we don't want to lose. Page 5 of the agenda, scrutiny and governance arrangements. Does anyone want to speak to this? Angela, Carla, do you want to add anything to this? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So as Councillor Cooper just mentioned, the main point of this item is to note that following a suggestion from this committee, we're proposing to the Combined Authority on the 9th of December to appoint a few additional members to scrutiny as substitutes for members who don't currently have a substitute. So we currently have a scrutiny substitute pool system where any member from the same district or party can substitute for someone from the same district and party on another scrutiny committee. But some members were listed in 2.4 don't have a sort of partner member. And so those members will be able to nominate a personal substitute basically to act on their behalf from their same party and district. So members on this committee are councillors Jeanette Sunderland, Andrew Cooper and Rachel Melly. So I presume at some point either you or your Democratic or Governance Services will ask you for a nomination. You can just go through the normal appointments process, and in future you can be covered. That's the only other thing to note, I think, is membership changes. So I should have said welcome to Councillor Tony Homewood, just appointed to this committee to replace Councillor Nadeem Ahmed from Wakefield. That's everything on this item.
Thank you. No, straight out. Item 6. One, two things points I'd like to make. Thanks ever so much for coming. It's not the obviously easiest place to get to in Leeds, is it? How many have come by public transport? Oh, well, oh, look at that. Well done. Jane, have you not come by train?
Chair, if they reopened Arthington Station, then I'd be very happy and pleased to come by train. Thank you.
Should never have closed it. We used to, kept the line through to Lockley and all that. Yes, quite right. That's pretty good. Though. And this is the one and only meeting we're going to have in this room. I think we should. Angela, are we going to anticipate that next year meetings will be back where they ought to be?
We are hopeful. Our refurbishment programme is drawing to a conclusion in January, so it'll be quite tight, but we are hoping that certainly for most of next year, we will be able to have meetings back in the new refurbished meeting room suite in Wellington House.
Thank you. We look forward to that. How long is it since we met there? 21 months or something, was it? March last year. I apologise for the room. It's the opposite of an ideal room. I mean, it's a cricket pitch from me to the lady at the other end, whoever they're going to be, and it's inexcusable. All meetings have round tables if you could do it, otherwise the chairman should sit in the middle alongside. I didn't design this room. I don't think it's appropriate at all, really. But we are where we are. If you haven't worked out already soon, well, the toilets are through there and across the anteroom and if you need to at lunchtime, if people want a snack, just across the road, across the car park there is the Beckett University. What do you call it, Jane? Is it a cafe restaurant?
It's a bit posh for a canteen or a restaurant, really. It's a really nice place that the students meet, and we've got permission to actually go over there, and the food is excellent.
And perhaps they don't take cash. It's the first place I know at least. You have to do it all on the card. But, as the average age of the customers is about 19, I guess. You're very welcome to go across there.
Sorry, Chair, just to say, if anybody does actually want to join us with a tea or a coffee, there are coffee making facilities just down the corridor. It's in a room that says private on it. So it's the first door you come to that says private. Just go through it and there is actually some flasks and some tea and coffee.
Well, perhaps we'll adjourn for 5 minutes at 11 o'clock if we feel like. See what the feeling of the meeting is. We're waiting for Mayor Brabin, who is on a telephone call with Ben. Not with him, but he's on the same end of the phone call, but she'll be with us as soon as she can. When we do begin, you remember that radio program called Just a Minute? We said people couldn't talk they had to talk, but without repetition and without deviation. And that is in the rules of this committee. You might have read it, but it is. Please don't wander off the point. Please, if you can, don't say the same thing 2 or 3 times, which is very tempting. We don't know how long this telephone call is going to take, so yeah. The quorum was reached. We've got Well, no, two more than quorum. So thanks ever so much for turning up. The people who've not turned up have got perfectly good reasons for not turning up. So we are really grateful. And that's a standard for all future meetings. Item 6 is, that's all. Item 7, you want to take us through that?
So at the last
Page
meeting,
9.
yeah, page 9 of the agenda. The last meeting, members discussed what sort of agenda items and topics they wanted to cover this year through this committee, and in questioning the mayor.
Can everybody hear, guide? Yeah. Right.
It's attached as Appendix 1. What we did, because of we were asked by various members if we could have all the work programs in one place, so the committees could, members of each committee could see what the other committees were doing. There's a summary page on page 13 of the agenda. And corporate ultimately we summarized the suggestions and tried to group them in as fewer topic headings as possible. So they came out, partnerships, mayoral soft power, budget and business planning, overall strategic and financial decision making, and workforce and corporate systems. So this meeting today obviously is the mayor's questions, where we'll to ask questions on any of those topics, anything within this corporate committee's remit. But for the future sessions, I mean, it's up to this committee to decide exactly when they want to take these agenda items, but there's 2 meetings left after this, January and March, unless a workshop or further meetings, the committee wants to set up any further meetings or workshops. I suppose it's for members to discuss and decide when they actually want to bring these items forward. Yes, shall pass.
Comments or questions on what we intend to do? I suppose we ought to make a point. If significant and unanticipated things crop up, we can always divert from this and look at other items if it suits us at the time. It's for more for my, but how many people are on scrutiny boards in their own authorities? Because oh yes, of course, that's pretty good. Yes, thank you. They're all different, aren't they? Have you kept up to date with the status of scrutiny in Manchester? Because Khaled is going to summarise this. Scrutiny in Manchester has an appalling reputation and is doing nothing to challenge or monitor or manage the mayor. Comment. Well, the facts. It is, yes, that's right. It is alleged, yes.
Reviewing their scrutiny.
That's it, is it? Manchester, Greater Manchester Scrutiny has had problems with people turning up on quoracy, cancelled meetings, and I don't think has made any serious contribution to the corporate life in Manchester at all. Read it if you get a chance. It is a terrible indictment, they say, of local authorities, scrutiny and supervision. It's just not working at all. We'll circulate that stuff about Manchester because it is public and it is a horrible warning to us. Right, it's in the continued absence of the mayor. Shall we just do? We're all free on the 21st of January 2022, are we? Yep. Yeah, well, I'm sure. Thank you. Sorry? 10 o'clock. Well, it may not be. What time is it? Do you know? 10 o'clock and either here or on Wellington Street. Wellington Street's just so ideal, isn't it, for all the buses and the train so close to the station. How do we advise the mayor that we're all waiting for her? Right. Khaled wants to go through the agenda for January. Didn't know he did, but now he does.
Apologies, everyone, if I'm getting this completely wrong, but it is my first time on WICA scrutiny. And obviously January is a long time.
Yeah.
And we've just had the latest announcement of the HS2 not coming to the north east, really, in general. Bradford in particular is going to be quite hard hit, but so is Leeds by these decisions. So I would imagine our mayor will be making decisions about this between now, because it's quite a shock, isn't it, really, and January. And I'm just wondering whether that is something we may want to bring forward to discuss in January, or whether it is actually our remit to discuss it in January. We're sort of anticipating what might take place between now and January, really.
I think that's an extremely relevant point. Yes, it's sort of the biggest thing that's going to happen to the combined authority this year. And when on top of it, I think probably theoretically, it is more transport scrutiny committee's area of interest, but we are indeed interested. Go on, Jane.
Sorry, because part one, I've just been reading the remit, is about decision making,
Yeah,
and that is our remit.
point taken. All right, Jeanette. Has your light gone on?
It's my ability to control my finger. It was going to be the question I wanted to ask. What were the next steps, given that there is so much soft power potentially being used right at this moment in time? So what is she actually doing? Because there's lots of stuff appearing in the news and on the news, and dramatic walks through markets in Bradford with various leaders. But what is it actually that's happening now on a day-by-day basis? Because it'll be a bit late to find out just after Christmas.
Thank you. That's relevant as well. Jeff, do you want to contribute?
Could I just say, clearly, issues around the budget will have to be of major significance to this committee. And I don't know whether the timing of the 21st of January is in line with us to be able to look at some of the budget planning issues or not. But clearly, it's going to be very relevant to all of the work that WICA does.
Well, I would think that the budget will be well and truly put to bed by the 2nd of January. None? Yes.
Yeah, sorry, it's a long way away. No, only to say we're taking a sort of starting point of the budget paper to the 9th of December combined authority meeting. The budget paper will go on the 3rd of February. So I think in response to the council's comments, if you would like to have the ability to scrutinise it in advance of papers being finalised for February, we probably would need to put a workshop or an additional date in the diary.
I guess the feeling of the meeting will be that we do want a chance to review and scrutinise, question it, and perhaps we'd take around what was the best time for us to make a serious contribution. My experience is about half an hour in December when you're able to do that. Up to a certain time where it's all very premature, council, and after that it's, well, we've agreed that, I'm sorry, it's too late. When's the best time for us to contribute?
I think so at some point between those two meetings, so hopefully the 9th of December we'll set out some of the big picture challenges, assumptions, and I think it's probably, as you say, after that is the time to make sure you think we've picked out all the things that matter when we are then putting everything back together for the February meeting. So I'll work with Khaled, if you like, to see if we can find a suitable date in between the 9th of December and the Christmas break.
So perhaps we're looking at a joint meeting for 3 scrutiny groups to be briefed by you and to ask questions. Perhaps unfair to invite you to make the same presentation to three groups, but how would people feel about a meeting in the middle of December to be briefed? Who think they could take that? Again, it's coming to Leeds, I imagine. Well, you can't answer now, but I think we ought to look at something like that, don't we?
I don't know about the room that's used at WICA, but this particular room does actually have hybrid facilities. So people who can't make it, and there are a lot of councillors to which this is a long distance for them to travel.
Oh, yeah.
Then if we could do a hybrid meeting, that would actually mean potentially much better attendance.
I'm sure that's right. Thank you. Shall we leave that to officers to come back with us on see if they can organise something for us the week after December the 9th, sometime around then, at which we can be briefed and interrogate the figures. Thank you. Jeanette, did you have your hand up again, or were you?
That was a way of indicating agreement with you, Chair, without having to get all of the technology up and running.
I'm just not used to people indicating agreement with me. Thank you. Right. We'll, as it were, start the meeting proper. Thank you, Mayor Bravin. It's good of you to come. I think you've been doing less important things until now this morning, have you? But now you're here. It's good of you. We do appreciate you've got enormous pressures on your time. It's good of you to come. We have a series of questions that we've agreed between us, but it would be naive of us not to spend the first 5 minutes, and I mean 5 minutes, listening to an update on the announcements yesterday about transport and the HS2. But I really mean 5 minutes. If whoever's in the best position to brief us, over to you. But we're not wandering away from our brief, but come on, it's the most important thing that's happened to Combined Authority for a long time. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for welcoming me to this committee. It's my first scrutiny committee, and hopefully we can build a strong relationship together going forward that's transparent and collegiate. Yesterday was quite devastating for our community. We, as a member of the board of the Transport for the North, we had a plan in place that would deliver Northern Powerhouse Rail, a new rail network, including Bradford, that would go from Manchester to Leeds. We also knew that part of that plan was HS2 from Leeds down to Sheffield and then on to London. Now, it was quite shocking how little we got, and of all the regions across the north, it feels like we have been given the least. So you'll know from the press that there is no Northern Powerhouse Rail, that the TransPennine upgrade is going to be rebadged as Northern Powerhouse Rail. We don't have that high-speed network to Sheffield and beyond. And as the Prime Minister said in the document, that the HS2 stops at the border of Yorkshire. So that's quite frustrating. The only one of 3 new lines that we are party to comes from Warrington to Marsden. It's a new line. So that will then link to the TransPennine upgrade. This is terrible for our region, and also the West Yorkshire Mass Transit, which of course we're pleased that that's going ahead in the initial stages. That's part of the Conservative Party manifesto. We've also discovered subsequently that the 200 million, 100 million of that seems to be ring-fenced for an inquiry in how to get a high-speed train from Sheffield to Leeds. And as speaking to the minister and pressing him further, I said, so you may come to the conclusion that what we need is HS2. And he said, yes. So don't underestimate my determination to get the best for West Yorkshire. And honestly, speaking to passengers and stakeholders yesterday, the anger is palpable that we feel royally, I don't know whether this is committee language, shafted by government, and we'll be making the case that this is not good for the green carbon emission agenda. It is not good for connectivity. It is not good for unlocking the potential of the North. So I will continue the campaign, and I hope, and I'm sure I will get support from you in that.
Thank you. And I will definitely not open that up for discussion. Oh, we should be here till Tuesday. That's not, we're not going to start there now, but there's massive sympathy for you, that point of view, from Marsden to what's the other extreme on the east, Nottingham. Thank you very much. That was very articulate and very persuasive. We now start the bit of the meeting we know we came from. We're interested in various aspects of your role, but Councillor Winard is going to start with a question on soft power, I believe.
Devolution powers.
First deals then, so all right. Go ahead.
Mayor Brabin, it's interesting that an awful lot of the different devolution deals in different parts of the country provided different powers and different arrangements. I wonder whether you think that the powers that you have at the moment as mayor, and I accept it's a new situation. I wonder whether those powers are sufficient, you think, to deliver the various pledges which you've made.
Thank you so much. And for the committee members that aren't aware, that the mayoral powers are different depending on the region. So whilst Andy Burnham, for example, has the powers over health, we don't. But I'm also one of the only, one of two metro mayors in the country with powers over the police and crime. That gives me a unique position to work across the piece with a brilliant Venn diagram between housing, transport, opportunities, skills, training, and also police and crime. So it's a great position to be in. Now, I've been asked on a number of occasions, do I want to extend those powers? Obviously, I'm 6 months into the role, but I really do see the space for powers over the climate. I know that in other regions, they have a few more extended powers. Andy Street in the West Midlands, and I have been speaking about what else could be done. We're working with UK 100 about how to entrench more powers, for example, how many EV charging points we can put in our community, retrofitting homes, making the case, obviously, as you know, about buses being a priority, but how can we go further and faster to hit zero carbon by 2038. I would suggest that those powers could be extended. But the questioner is right in that actually a lot of the power of the mayor as the spokesperson for the region is a soft power. It's the power of convening, of bringing people together, of persuasion. And I've been able to obviously build relationships with ministers through my 5 years as a member of parliament. I know many of the ministers on first name terms. That is incredibly helpful. The power of the mayors collectively. We are part of a group of mayors, the M10, across the country. We have powers and influence. You will have seen yesterday, we had a virtual press conference with all the mayors in the north responding to the integrated rail plan. That does give us an extended voice that is definitely heard in Parliament. But also it's about reaching out to areas where I don't have regulatory or statutory powers. So, for example, with my commitment around equality, diversity and inclusion, we are working with the integrated care system to develop an inclusivity champion that will be able to work across both health and my office to not only close the social mobility gap in our region, but also the health inequality gap. So there are opportunities for us to work together. My powers aren't as extensive as I would have liked during the peak of COVID, when government weren't minded to mandate for mask wearing. I was able to say that actually in bus stations, it is mandatory. And then I was hoping that then people, if they were wearing them in the bus stations, because that's our estate, they would then continue to wear them on the buses. So it was frustrating that I didn't have that authority, but I felt I could lead by an example. Also, we have opportunities such as the Great Northern Conference, where I speak for our region with other mayors. And you'll know that the role of Police and Crime Commissioner, I work really extensively across the third sector and have had many a meeting with Kit Malthouse and other officers. So the powers are wide ranging from community right up to government. But as always, in the spirit of learning and intelligence, if you have further thoughts on how that could be extended, I'm always happy to hear great suggestions.
Thank you, Mayor, for that. But just to clarify, you've broadly said that you have sufficient powers to deliver your objectives, the 10 pledges you've made. Are there any areas where you think across West Yorkshire it would be better to have more of a strategic role across the 5 local authorities? I'm particularly thinking the original devolution deal talked about planning and spatial strategy, which I know doesn't appear. I believe they have those arrangements in Manchester. I just wonder whether you think that power would actually help you deliver more a strategic approach across the district. Bearing in mind, there must be some, you've talked about powers from above from government, but arguably, is there a case for some pooling of powers? Because I don't suppose we can, at the moment, I dare say you could suggest, well, the authorities are all working together well. But it could be at a future date, the authorities may be under different political control and it may be more challenging.
I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you, because it gives me an opportunity to speak about my relationship with the other leaders. Obviously, this is not just about the mayor, it's about the other leaders across the region. And you're right, actually, we have a really good relationship. So, for example, my commitment to 5,000 affordable, sustainable homes, I can't deliver that on my own. I've got to work with partners. And to be able to speak to my colleagues who lead the local authorities and say we've got to go further and faster on green and affordable homes. And I can identify pots of money that then can support them in identifying brownfield sites that could be regenerated, ready for building. So that's absolutely, I agree with you, that's the way to do it. I am looking at a Labour reign for for as long as I am mayor. Let's hope that continues, because the relationships are really strong. But if I may say, just across the region, I was able, with my Fair Work Charter, which is a commitment to mayors across the region, so that we have a fair charter across the north, so that West Yorkshire isn't the sweatshop where it's too expensive to pay workers in Manchester or Liverpool, so they come to West Yorkshire because they can get away with it. What I'm doing is standing shoulder to shoulder with mayors across the north to say we expect living standards to be higher for our residents. And certainly inclusive growth, we have to, if that's a priority, we have to put more money in people's pockets across the north and keep that money in our region. So it's an opportunity to work together. And certainly going forward, that is something I'm interested in exploring. So, for example, procurement of electric buses, can that be done at scale across the north? There are opportunities definitely there that currently we haven't explored.
Thank you. Andrew? You want to add? What you saying, Ben, wants to contribute?
Chair, sorry, just if you forgive me, just to come back to Councillor Winant's point, we did originally have some provisions in the devolution deal around integrated infrastructure planning between the combined authority and local authorities. Those provisions were removed or asked by government not to put in at that point in time for this specific the order that underpins the mayor's powers, on the basis that the government was going to wrap that up in the forthcoming planning white paper. So to some extent, we still await to see what provisions will be in that.
Thank you, that's useful. Andrew?
Okay, given the well understood phenomenon of induced increased traffic as a result of new roads and wider roads, will the mayor be reviewing her support for the schemes in the West Yorkshire road programmes, given their carbon impact and that impact on our 2038 zero carbon economy target?
Thank you. We'll be interested in the comment, but
Yeah.
really we're in danger of trespassing, aren't we? Yeah, will the transport people, what transport scrutiny?
Climate change is on our brief.
I'm not trying to. I'm making the point that other people will be looking into this as well.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper, and it was good to see you at COP26 in Glasgow. And we did have this conversation there. Obviously, regarding road building, my priority to get buses efficient, reliable, and obviously cost effective. There is an element of road building or road prioritisation. If we want to build active travel numbers, we need roads for cycling. So there is a piece of work to be done on the balance, but absolutely, we can't have a brilliant bus transport network unless we have the road network as well. Of course, this is, as the chair says, this is potentially an item for greater scrutiny at the Transport Committee, but I'm very happy to take that offline if necessary.
Follow up on that. If it can be shown that there's no impact on buses, and if it can be shown that the impact of bus times to get to and from places is negligible, would that be a stronger incentive to review the investment in some of those projects, particularly if it can be demonstrated they have a negative impact on carbon emissions and threaten our 2038 targets?
Thanks for that additional question. And I absolutely want to reinforce the commitment to the climate emergency, and that all of those questions are absolutely going to be a priority when we're talking about our integrated transport system across West Yorkshire. You'll have read my climate and the environment plan, and we are now part of the West Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission. It's absolutely a priority, and please be reassured that we can work together on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning. About your, again, this is a question around your influence and lobbying. And a few areas, we talked a little bit earlier, you talked about HS2. In general, how do you feel you can approach the government and get results with regards to getting our fair share of levelling up funds, and also specifically for local authorities, how do you think you can help us to get fair funding established going forward? You're obviously aware, I'm sure, of the issues we have as local authorities in terms of ongoing provision of services to our citizens. So I'd be very interested in understand how you feel you'll approach that and how best you can influence government to achieve, what we need.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. I must say, I'm going to share my frustration with you, because coming into this role and being told we have devolution, and then having to go into beauty contests to bid for funding, and you'll know the community, what's it called again? Community Renewal Fund. It seems so arbitrary where that money has gone across the country. So we have got an issue around developing projects that will be ready when governments have a scheme that they want to announce with a very limited time frame for delivery. We have a tension there between the ability and the capacity to deliver those schemes in readiness, and then also to deliver the bids for these beauty contests funding pots. And you'll know the community, the city region sustainable transport settlement. I mean, that was a bid that went in over the summer. So our officers had to work flat out, cancelling holidays, working over the summer, trying to get that bid in. Now, we did well, relatively. We bid 920 million and we got 830 million. So we did get a good outcome. Some of that wasn't all new money, and a lot of that's going to be spent on potholes. However, my point is that this doesn't feel like devolution to me. So I would suggest that it feels like potentially government are rolling back on the powers of the mayors. So it is important that we keep making the case that if you think about the growth fund in 2014, I think it was 300+ million that we were given, maybe it was 253, I'm trying to remember, but the money that was given to us, the LEPs, us to spend, it had outcomes of 1 to 12. So for every pound that was spent, we got 12 in growth. We know where the money should go. We know how to spend it. And it seems to me that when we're developing transport bids, we're going back to government and saying, will you accept this? Is this okay? This is not the way devolution works. And I'm making the case that that surely the way for us to help government in levelling up is we know where the need is and we can do it more cost effectively. So it's a really good question. And also what is important is not to fall into the trap of some mayors, at various times getting more money than other mayors, because that divide and rule does not help any of us. We must stand together as the North. And you will have seen over the integrated rail plan yesterday. There was a question for journalists on our virtual symposium of mayors. Well, Andy, you've got so much for West Yorkshire, for Greater Manchester. What can you tell the other mayors how to do it? And he was furious. He said that's absolutely the trap that government wants to fall into. We must stand together because we are all interconnected. So I'm not quite sure if that's fully answered your question, but it's certainly important for me that we try and get as much authority over the money and where it's spent as we can without these time-consuming beauty contests that we're all not always successful in.
Thanks. It's clearly a difficult area, and it's clearly difficult to give a straightforward, simple answer. I understand that. I absolutely agree with you. I think that whole a collective approach and solidarity amongst the regions is vital. I think also, certainly, from my perspective, working closely with us as local authorities is crucial, and that the immense strength that we would gain from that makes sense as well. But it would certainly be something, from my perspective, I'm sure other people would want to see this, some clarity on what outcomes we're looking to achieve in terms of accessing those funds, accessing that ability, the ability to influence strategic plans in the north going forward as well. And clearly that, as I say, I know that's difficult, but I think that is probably one of the most important things that we need to focus on.
Thank you.
Can I ask a supplementary to that question? Who do you actually talk to? Do you get direct access to the appropriate ministers? Probably Michael Gove at present, I don't know who it might be. Do you get to speak to them, or is it officer to officer, or is it 5 layers down the structure to 5 layers down the structure, and it has a lot less chance of influencing things? Who do you talk to?
That's a good question. Michael Gove, I really welcome his position, his new role, and we were on a call together with him. I subsequently wrote to him. I've invited him to West Yorkshire. I work with ministers. For example, when we had the launch of the Sturton Park and Ride, the first solar powered park and ride in the country, Rachel McLean, who was the minister at the time, was able to come and launch that with us. I have a good relationship with ministers, but there is no doubt about it. We don't necessarily get the full access, and we have, as mayors, since I became the mayor, been asking the Prime Minister for a meeting. So unfortunately, it is also about government, whether they choose to give us access. But I've meetings with Grant Shapps, I've meetings with other junior ministers as well. It depends on the topic of the day, but yes, there is definitely some relationships of which I'm obviously building further.
I don't think we can actually arrange a meeting with the Prime Minister this morning, but we'll work on it.
Mayor, on the issue of engagement with government and the influencers, is your view that constructive engagement with government is the way forward, or do you think opposition, I suppose, I'm not suggesting this is the case, or making big gestures is the solution to get the extra resources we need? And I suppose linked to that, clearly, and I know you don't necessarily like having to bid for funds, but bearing in mind that seems to be the position we're in, are you happy that this authority has got the infrastructure and the resources to do the bidding for funds in a good quality way and to ensure we maximise the chances of success?
Thank you, Councillor Winard. I came into politics late. I have no time for political shenanigans. It's, in my view, not time efficient. So I will work with anybody that will work with us and wants the best for West Yorkshire. I have worked with Conservative members of Parliament, and obviously, as Ben has reminded me, that 3/4 of our money comes from government. So why on earth would I try and develop obstacles to efficiencies to deliver for West Yorkshire? It doesn't make any sense. I really am a collaborator, I'm collegiate, I'm a cooperator. My focus is getting the best for West Yorkshire. I have to say at the moment, I am furious with what we've been offered in the IRP, but that doesn't mean to say I'm going to, it's all about political stunts or whatever. It's about getting the best deal and going into those meetings with ministers with an open mind about how we can work together to get the best for the people of West Yorkshire.
Good. Ben, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just a brief supplementary. In terms of the capacity question that was asked, I think we have good capacity and a good track record in terms of bidding. I think the challenge actually lies both within the combined authority and within partner councils to have the capacity to develop the projects and the pipeline of projects, because often the bids that we're asked to respond to, we're asked to respond very quickly for schemes that have to deliver within a very short period of time. So the challenge is really how you build long-term certainty in a world of short-term competitive bidding.
If I may just add, Chair, when we get an announcement of a bid opportunity, we then have to recruit as well to help us with that bid, and that could be 2 or 3 months. So it is deeply unfair that this is to try and reiterate the point that this bidding process, when it's just short-termism, is not helpful for our region.
Speakers in the queue, but George hasn't spoken yet. Do you want to make your point, George?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor Bravin, as well. You mentioned the deal West Yorkshire get from government. Just want to ask about the deal local authorities areas get from you, if I may. Obviously, you've noted that it seems arbitrary where money goes across the country. I just want to delve into your own fair funding policies. I tend to prefer funding formulas that are based on a methodological approach. I think it's fair to say this provides local authorities areas with a degree of certainty in their forward planning. Some name formulas like these, the Barnett formulas, you could name this one the Robinson formula, you never know. But my question is, what methodology do you have in place to ensure every local authority area gets fair funding? Thank you, Chair.
I think you've coined it now, so I think we definitely need to develop that. Look, certainly with the 38 million gain share, there could be a school of thought that should just be sliced into a pie and given per head to each region. But that is not what the gain share is necessarily for. It's about building productivity, building opportunity, growth, skills. And excuse me, my role is to work for the whole of West Yorkshire. So there isn't that particular formula, but it is working with councils to identify the best opportunities. So for example, in Bradford, where inclusive growth and access to opportunity is great, you may end up potentially investing further into Bradford because they have further to go if it's a particular project. So it is the ebb and flow of what comes from the councils themselves and also what our strategic plan is. But I don't know if Ben or Angela want to comment on whether there is a formula. I'm not aware of a formula as such.
If I may, thank you, Mayor. So there isn't a formula because the funding that comes to combined authorities doesn't allow the level of certainty for that to work sensibly. And indeed, gain share is probably the best example where the devolution deal, I'm not sure that does it explicitly, but certainly the gateway test that we have to go through, we'll have to go through every 5 years, actively seeks to avoid any substitution with what you would call local authority or indeed combined authority core funding. So there is that's a challenge towards providing money on the basis of any kind of formula. In the past, the CA CA funding model has tended to work on the basis of need and impact, and to treat programmes at the level of West Yorkshire. So the growth deal that the Mayor has talked about, which was looked after by the investment committee in the pre-mayoral model, that was always looking at where was the best impact to be gained across West Yorkshire, rather than looking at it at a local authority level. However, what we're looking to do now in terms of deepening the partnership with local authorities is very much looking at what's the totality of the relationship between the combined authority and the local authority, and how can we best provide that long-term certainty in terms of funding that allows both partners to build that capacity in order to be able to have more impact on the ground.
Thank you. Interesting. We have a series of questions which are good in a second. Yes, please. We have brief questions supplemental, and we're going to move on to gain share then, because that gets lots of people excited. So we'll have some brief, very brief questions and answers on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. I don't normally use a mic, so I don't normally need a mic, I should turn around and say. So there we go. I just wanted to follow up. I was hoping Councillor Robinson would propose it as the Councillor Robinson-Barnes formula, but I'm not that precious. But I think he has a point, and I think the point is, and this was discussed heavily in Calderdale throughout the early stages of devolution, the concern was that areas such as Calderdale, being the smallest local authority, would lose out, and that the sheer size of Leeds and Bradford would hoover up all of the investment. And I think we need to be very careful and need to make sure that whatever we do going forward is not penalising the smaller and more outlying regions of the authority. So I think that is a vital point that Councillor Robinson raised. Thank you.
Thank you. I think before you answer that one, are you a supplementary as well? And then do you want to deal with them both together?
Yeah, I think Councillor Barnes summarised it very well. You know, it's clear that he's learned from my training in Calderdale. So I'll let Mayor Bravin answer that one. Thank you.
I imagine you had this question before.
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's about working in partnership with the councils to make sure that doesn't happen. But when we put bids in that we think are really exemplary bids, and then government decide not to support that bid, it's slightly out of our hands. But it is absolutely about partnership working. And just to reiterate, that's why it's really important that we have good relationships all together, all of us, the leaders and myself, so that we can support each other, because we're nothing without each other.
A brief question.
I'll try and be brief. We've talked a lot about influencing government and what you're going to do in that. How are you going to influence and engage our citizens across West Yorkshire? You know, an example in terms of issues like community wealth building. How are you going to engage with those to help that influence with government? Because for me, that's a huge strength if we can do that.
As you know, the budget and consultation with the public around, for example, the police and crime plan. We've had an extensive consultation where we're going into communities, myself and my Deputy Mayor, Alison Lowe, where we're reaching out to third sector. We've got a programme of what's called Tell Tracy, which will be like town hall events, going into community situations, those furthest away actually from power, and those who potentially feel they've never been heard. It's really a priority for me. And I've said right from the beginning that I am the voice of the people of West Yorkshire. I'll be transparent and approachable. And certainly, I'm not sure there are many mayors that travel on the bus and public transport. And I'm often approached by people in public with casework and with thoughts. But that is certainly a priority for me. We can't make decisions about people without engaging with them. So I'd be happy to share what else we're doing across the region in more detail.
Just a brief supplementary to say that one of the other things that we're looking to do in order to make best use of the existing local authority community relationships and networks that already exist, and doing that both through authorities and then Tracy doing that the mayor doing that directly herself. So we're trying to make use of the structures that are already there. But as you can imagine, engaging with the public at a level that is both collecting the kind of the anecdote and the passion and the issues that are important, and so doing as well in a way that is more quantified and representative is a real challenge.
If I may just add as well that the inclusivity champion that I spoke about previously will be working with inclusivity leads on all of the committees, and it will be their job as well to make sure that the voice of the community is heard at every decision point. So we're trying to cover all bases to make sure that the public are involved as much as possible, because currently our consultation is, I think it's called Your Voice, is online, and there's a particular cohort that engage with that. We definitely need to widen that out.
I agree with that. Yes, there are people who are computer literate in that sense, whose voices may be heard disproportionately. Let's move to gain share, which I always say is a new concept of local authority funding that I've never come across before. £38 million for this year. How much has been spent already, and where's it gone?
Thank you for that question. And certainly 38 million does excite people. I do feel like Father Christmas sometimes, that people keep coming to me like they want a bit of the gain share. But the gain share is for a strategic approach to the problems that face us. So for 2020-21, Angela very kindly has listed this for me, so I'll read it out. The combined authority agreed for skills and employment hub and reboot, 13.5 million. Local authority cultural recovery, 5 million. You'll know that during COVID, the cultural sector was really devastated. So 1 million went to each council. The West Yorkshire Economic Recovery Plan, 7 million. Getting mayoral ready was 3 million. That's obviously paying for elections. Transforming Cities Fund, 9.5 million, which is for capital projects. That's 38 million. So that was last year. And then, of course, going forward, there will be the mayoral pledges that money has been allocated to. You'll know from my first manifesto commitments, the bus reform, we've allocated 1 million. Culture and the creative sector, 500,000. Skills, 500,000. Fair Work Charter, 0.6 million, that's over 3 years. Inclusivity champion, 0.4 million over 3 years, and supporting businesses, 500,000. So that's 3.5 million. But just to say, that is initial funding to make sure that every single one of my 10 pledges had money and activity attached to it in readiness for the first 100 days. So we can see that the money available, it can't deliver for every project. It's just not enough to go around. But I wonder if Angela would like to come in on this with a bit of a deeper dive on it.
Thank you. Yeah, the challenge is making what sounds like a lot of money go a long way. 38 million doesn't go as far as we might want it to. We allocated last year's funding, or the Combined Authority allocated it. All of these decisions have gone through a meeting with the Combined Authority. The money that so far this year has been very much picking up the capacity issues before, has been about looking at what it is we need to do. It has been about trying to develop some of the pipelines, what are the projects we want to deliver. And the work at the moment and over the next couple of months is very much about looking in more detail at all of these areas with our partners, with the local authorities, and determining how best we can spread this money around to get the best outcomes across all these different fronts for the region. We had been careful not to move too quickly with proposals, waiting to see if there was funding through the comprehensive spending review, as that would obviously, our agenda is, the Mayor's agenda, the Combined Authority's agenda is significantly larger than can be met by 38 million a year. So we are looking at much bigger aspirations, and it's how we can then chunk that down into things that we can deliver. There's obviously still some funding from CSR to be unravelled, but we are looking actively now at how each of these can get taken forward, and where we can potentially build up some programmes, possibly use the gain share to borrow in the future, because borrowing will give us a bigger capital sum for some of the interventions. But it is quite a challenge. There is a huge amount of ambition for the region and lots of areas, project interventions that everybody wants to deliver with what is ultimately a limited sum each year.
Just clear my mind. How much of the 38 million has been spent in this year so far? I understand it's been budgeted, been set aside, but how much, what checks have been made? What money's been paid out on each of those? Well, in total, not in each of those.
I would have to check the cash flowing of that. As we've said, these have all been allocated and approved and are cleared to spend. The actual spending, some of them are over 3 years, so they don't spend immediately. Much of last year's was spent last year into this year, but I would have to just go away and just check the timing of that money, because some of it has been paid to partners who are then spending it on the project. So we don't have all of that information immediately to hand. But there are no delays on the money allocated. It's been approved for spend.
I suppose that's a better question. Has all the money allocated been spent or will be spent by March or as soon as it's practical?
Yeah, it's not time limited. Obviously, we want it to make a difference as quickly as possible. So many of these programs have been about spending money soon in order to identify the next stages. But I can check where the cash flow is on all of this funding.
I think some of us have been interested to see where the £38 million or what, however much of it's been spent already halfway through the year now, and more than that now. See, it'd be interesting to know where it's gone and where the over and underspends. There can't be overspends, presumably, where the underspends have been. Other questions on gain share, Andrew?
Yeah, just a question really about the gain share to deliver the 5,000 green homes target. I guess my interest really is about how that is delivered and how you're going to deliver it. One of the elements of this is about the sorry, you seem.
Sorry, I just needed. Sorry, councillor. I just needed a figure. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, just wondering how you are going to deliver it. The questions being, what is a green home? Because a green is a very strange definition. It covers, I know this from experience, there's all sorts of uses of the word green. So my particular feeling is that the Passive House standard is a really good standard, and I've talked to members of the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership about this and had some really interesting conversations with them about it. And what we can do on the skills agenda to actually deal with that and make that more deliverable, because in other areas we're much better at it. Exeter, Norwich, York's got a 600 house Passive House target, York City Council. So I'm just wondering what green is and what we can do together to help deliver it.
There is a wide range of criteria for green, and what I was quite startled about was that sustainable is also if you're near a bus stop, if you're near public transport, because that means you don't have a car. So that is, you're absolutely right. There is quite a movable feast about what green does mean. I've been shown around and I've enjoyed a couple of visits to Situ in Leeds on the South Bank. They are green and they're zero carbon, but they're eye-wateringly expensive as well. So I think for me, it's about making sure that our criteria is sustainable, but also affordable, and making sure that new homes have EV charging points. I also think homes that are lifelong homes, so encouraging builders to think about disability and to think about accessibility is also important. Modular homes is potentially also a way to go, and a way to get young women particularly into construction. I've spent a fair bit of time at the Leeds College of Construction working with them about what's innovation, how can we build homes faster. But it is about partnership working. So it is about working with councils and identifying, as I said earlier, those opportunities for where we see brownfield, supporting them, finding the money to turn that land around. And the brownfield fund that was part of the devolution deal, that has all been allocated now. So we do have a list, if you were interested in having a look, the list of where some of that allocation is going. And some of it is actually underway already, which I'm really pleased to see. I don't know if you want to add anything further, Ben?
Thank you, Mayor. Only to say that there are working definitions of both sustainable and low carbon that we're working to. We'll share those with the committee. I don't have them to hand right now, but we can share the definitions.
I just want to come back on eye-wateringly expensive, because I hear this a lot. And I think a lot of the problem with is that there are so many one-off and pilot projects that result in high cost. And what you tend to find is where there is a policy, where there is a standard, where there is commitment, where there is that certainty that can be provided, the costs come down because the industry invests in skills, the industry invests in the products that are needed, and the costs start to come down. Exeter City Council, Wolverhampton Council, all these councils have done some tremendous work in actually lowering costs of passive house design, which is gold standard, to not that much more than the standard you would expect from a standard build. Passive House Trust reckons about 5 to 7% on top of cost, but then you also have the revenue reduction in terms of the running costs of those buildings as well. So eye-wateringly expensive, I think, is often the automatic reaction, and I think we should look beyond that.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with your point about the more you do, the cheaper it gets. And I just say, Kirklees Council, the work that they're doing on retrofitting council stock, whilst really pricey to do, I think it was 6 or 8 homes, the learning has been fantastic, and the young people, that the apprentices as well that are working on that retrofitting have learned so much, and their skills will go on. But certainly for me, I think also it is a combination of new build, but also making sure that our council house stock is fit for the future and is warm, and we can bring down those energy costs for the people that have least disposable income. So I think it is a combined pincer movement between making sure we get that mass retrofitting across West Yorkshire.
Yeah, well, very briefly, because other people want to speak.
Kirklees Council's one of those, they had a passive house report, an all-party passive house report on what they could do 6 years ago. They're now doing a 12-house pilot project, which will be probably eye-wateringly expensive. They're getting it wrong in a big way.
Thank you. We're going to drag this conversation back to gain share, which is where we're supposed to be. Jeff, then Mike.
Mayor, Angela, in her comments, mentioned the possibility of borrowing against gain share monies, which would obviously increase the amount available. What are the long-term plans? Are there long-term plans regarding borrowing? Are we aware of other mayoral authorities? Mind you, they don't have gain share, but are we aware of other mayoral authorities being in a position to borrow monies? And what do we think, or do you think the real risks are of this? Because obviously it might sound attractive in the short term, but there must be risks and considerations which need to be thought about.
I know who wants to answer that one.
I'd suggest Angela, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Every local authority borrows, every combined authority borrows. The rules and regulations around borrowing are immense. They're there to protect the authorities, and we comply with them, everybody else complies with them. So the borrowing can only be undertaken when it's affordable. The risks of borrowing in that environment are therefore limited and mitigated, because we have to be clear that we can meet, we or any other authority that borrows can meet the commitments for debt payments. The attraction of borrowing is that it turns a smaller sum today into a bigger sum today, but it's like a mortgage. So clearly you have to keep being able to pay it off. One of the advantages for us at the moment, we have one devolution deal. We clearly aspire to more, but we have one fixed amount of money, not going up by inflation, and that will eventually start to deteriorate over time because inflation will eat away into it. So if all we do each year is spend 38 million this year, next year, and so on for the next 20, 25, 30 years, it will diminish to not a lot. So there is a point where we probably will get some better value out of it by using it to support borrowing costs. However, we can only borrow for capital purposes. There needs to be an asset at the end of it. And when you look across the breadth of what we want to do, there are some clear revenue projects. Many of the interventions around lots of skills and business, for example, are revenue spend, not capital. So part of the work that we're looking at now is looking at understanding that future program. Will it make sense to commit a portion of the gain share to borrowing, backed up by a really clear program that delivers against the investment priorities the authority signed off and the pledges that the mayor has set out. Other combined authority areas, some have committed all of their gain share to borrowing, and that has limited their ability to make changes. And particularly as funding is never certain for combined authorities. As you had covered in some of the conversation today, we are there isn't a really common shared funding model for combined authorities. We are dependent very heavily on bits of money coming forward from government outside our transport levy. We have no other sort of secure income. So there is a need to be the ability to respond and be a little bit agile as things change. But all of this, we will be setting out all of these options over the coming months, and decisions around all this will come back to the combined authority from the mayor.
Thank you, Mike and George.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting. I saw a company 30 odd years ago that was developing modular housing projects that none of the banks would fund because they saw no future in it. So that's a significant missed opportunity, which seems to be the word of the day, opportunity. I think my question goes back to gain share, and I think it would be beneficial if, let's say on a half annual basis, we got those figures.
Yes.
And in particular, where the money has been allocated or paid out to partners, that we had an idea of how much those partners had paid. I think if we could bring that to on a half annual basis, I think that would be very beneficial.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Noted, Angela. You. George.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just about this borrowing against gain share. I think it sounds a bit troubling to me, the phrase borrow today to spend today, because what about tomorrow? And the issue I've got here is we're in a mayoral system. You know, Mayor Bravin may be the next mayor. She may not be the next mayor. So it's to the extent to which this borrowing against gain share is actually tying the hands of future elected mayors. I just want your take on that, if possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ben would like to answer that.
Thank you. I think it's undoubtedly the case that that if the combined authority borrowed to the maximum extent that it could possibly do in order to fund schemes immediately, then that definitely creates a repayment requirement for future mayors and for the combined authority going forward. And there's no escaping that. I think the approach that we're looking to follow is slightly different, which is much more about, and it's back to the early conversation we had about developing the pipeline. You don't need the sums of money. You don't need to borrow to develop the sums of money required to develop the projects themselves. It's when those projects need to start developing that the amount of cash you need gets significantly higher. So I think we're looking at a model that is much more about borrowing when we need to borrow, when we have projects ready to deliver. And it's back to Angela's point about agility. The idea being that we develop the projects that the local authorities, the combined authority need for the objectives for West Yorkshire. If we can find other sources of funding to fund those projects as we're developing them, we'll seek those. And if we can't, then we will deploy gain share. We might need to borrow for gain share to achieve that. But it is about that agility. And I think we need to be focused on what is it we're trying to achieve and what are the projects we need and the programs we need to do that, rather than start from how much money have we got and what do we want to spend it on.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I do appreciate that. Really quickly, is there a cap, a borrowing cap?
There is a borrowing cap. We have a borrowing cap set for this year. Treasury have a strange system where they seem to be wanting to do this on an annual basis. We are pleading with them to do it on a longer term basis, because clearly if we borrow, anyone who borrows today has a commitment beyond just this year. So we have agreed a cap for this year, which was signed off by the Combined Authority at its last meeting. It gives us some headroom way above what our actual budgeted expected borrowing is, because in reality, our borrowing is constrained by our affordability. The cap is an additional point, but we will not hit the debt cap for this year. We are yet to enter into negotiations for next year. We're waiting for Treasury to approach us about the form they'd like that to take.
If I may say, Chair, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Councillor Sunderland has had her hand up for a while.
I do apologise, sorry. Jeanette, go on. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, don't worry about it. We're a long way apart on so many levels. So this was just a thing in terms of the opportunities for gain share. And I don't think when we start worrying about borrowing money, for transparency's sake, I'm a beneficiary as a trustee of a children's charity who is taking the opportunity for a very tiny amount of gain share that will make a huge difference to the lives of you people. So I know we're doing the big adult stuff about whether we should borrow or not, but actually I think we should celebrate the fact that there is that gain share pot of money, and that we should all be making the routes into our communities to make sure that that is actually where it gets spent for the benefit of changing lives. Thank you.
If I may say thank you, because that is what it's about, is the cost-effective way to make the greatest impact.
Can I just understand the mechanics of it? Who do we actually borrow from then? From the Treasury? And we don't issue bonds or go to the money market. Who go to Barclays? Who lends us the money? The Treasury?
Most local authorities borrow from the Public Works Loan Board.
Right. Okay.
There are other options out there, but we are constrained by our Treasury management strategy, which will be coming to the February Combined Authority meeting for reapproval. But that is the usual source of funding for local authorities.
So we borrow from the Public Works Loan Board.
Yeah.
And so on our balance sheet, there'll be a figure which shows the amount outstanding at March 31st.
Correct. And it does already. We have some historic borrowing from way back in
Inherited,
the
yes.
Transport Authority's time. We also, in our group accounts next year, will have the borrowing that the police have undertaken, which is now in our name also.
Right. So what rates are we paying if we're borrowing at present?
The rates vary day by day. The rates we've got are rooted back many, many years ago. Average is, I think, 4.some%. The rates today are lower, but we need to have a purpose to borrow. We can't speculatively borrow. That's part of the rules. So we won't be undertaking borrowing until we've got a capital commitment we need to make. We do have some programs that are coming up to that point. Our West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund has a commitment to local contribution through borrowing, and that's been in place for some time. And there is a commitment to support the Transforming Cities Fund above the level that government funded us for.
So can the Public Works Loan Board ever say, no, you've had enough? We're no further appetite to lend to the Combined Authority?
Not in my experience. No.
Can I ask how applications or suggestions get on the list for the gain share? I mean, do you advertise? How do people know that the gain share fund is available? We know because we know, but do the people out there know there's 38 million a year? Not enough.
It is not. We are establishing the process for it. There will be some elements that will be open to other smaller organisations to bid into, but under a particular theme or a particular heading. And some of the schemes we've approved are about doing that. At the moment, we're working with local authority partners to understand what the sorts of areas of spend might be. Some of it might involve us putting out a call for project around a particular theme, a particular area, but we don't envisage we'd be having a general open call for any organisation that needed funding, I think we would be deluged. But there are certainly the intention is to have some programmes where, as Councillor Sunderland said, some small amounts can make a big difference, but there will be specific cash limited managed programmes that will be announced and set out in due course.
If I may just add as well that the 10 mayoral manifesto pledges are helpful in that way, that they do focus our priorities and our direction of travel. So, for example, tackling climate change, opportunities or jobs for young people. Those projects obviously will be going up the scale a little bit because that is important for the mayoralty.
I imagine everybody around this table is associated with other organisations who are always desperate for money. How do we access them? Do we recommend people write to you or to the chair? What's the process? How did you, Jeanette? How did you get? Were you aware of this funding and accessed it? Because and how do we, if we feel it's appropriate, recommend it other people do the same?
So Bradford Council very helpfully advertised it on their website, and as a committed trustee, I read the council's website and look for those opportunities. I think people within that the sector that are looking for funding will know how to access funding. I wouldn't want you to sort of think that, well, actually the only way to get to some funding is because you've got a mate who can forward you on and then you can get onto a special list with the mayor for funding, because I wouldn't want that to even happen. And I would say that Leeds Community Foundation, Bradford Community Foundation have got some really good ways of letting people get into, and maybe we need to build strong relationships in that direction rather than deluging the mayor with all the other stuff that she has to be deluged with.
Right.
Chair, if I may, I think it's back to the earlier conversation that the starting point for this is what are the overarching objectives that the combined authority wants to achieve, and the first answer to the question of how do you influence that is the influencing of what those objectives are, because those objectives lead to a set of targets, indicators that we're trying to impact upon, and that in turn leads to programs and projects. And then, as Angela has said, some of those programs and projects might well then have calls to organisations working in those areas to feed in the way that Councillor Sunderland has outlined. So I think it starts from what are the strategic objectives that you're trying to achieve.
Question, please.
Sorry. It's around prioritisation, really. I love the idea. I hate short-termism because it doesn't get you anywhere in the long run. You need to prioritise, and all these projects that come forward, how do you actually prioritise which is the most important and which is going to take a priority in your funding?
Well, it's about the commitment to the region and what outcomes do we want, and that is about inclusive growth. That is about ending poverty. 1/3 of all children in West Yorkshire live in poverty. So it's the focus on making life better for the people of West Yorkshire. And I couldn't agree more with you about short-termism. And whilst I may be cheeky to say this, I'm looking definitely at 7 years that we can make an impact across the region. I think it's very difficult going from one funding round to another, and certainly projects that have only 1 year to run. How do you recruit for a project like that? So, for example, our independent sexual violence advisors, we've had to make the case that we need more than 1 year's funding because it's very hard to recruit, train, and then get them into the job. So it's a really important point you make, but it is about my fundamental overarching mission is to make life better for the people of West Yorkshire, to give them more money in their pocket, better quality of life, better health outcomes, better opportunities for skills, training, better transport, and happier lives with greater well-being. So they're the overarching direction of travel, but of course there's lots of themes under that, which are the 10 manifesto pledges are also part of it. I don't know if you want to add anything, Ben.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess at a technical level, one of the rules, if you like, that comes with game changer funding from central government is that it must be subject to the Combined Authorities Assurance Framework. And every year we have to have that assurance framework signed off by government. What that does is it provides checks and balances around value for money. And it then creates the policy framework in which you would assess and prioritise projects. So, for example, you might have base criteria, for example, that a project must improve, say, equality of outcome for communities, and not worse than that, must be net zero or have a positive impact on the environment, and or must pass a certain value for money threshold. But then, of course, there are then more difficult to assess prioritization factors, such as those based on the distribution of the impact across over space and time, that ultimately the relevant committees will need to make decisions on. But the assurance framework is the kind of guiding structure that helps us through that process.
Yeah, I suppose it's the same in lots of ways, and it's like the old Dublin argument, isn't it? How do you get to Dublin? Well, I wouldn't necessarily start from here, and everything is linked to everything else, which is really complicated, because if you want to improve health outcomes, it might not necessarily be about building more hospitals. It might be about improving housing, better education of our young people on health issues, the environment. Everything's linked, isn't it, to everything else, and that prioritization is key to get the outcomes you want. So just to say, good luck to you, because you've got a huge task, and I personally think you've made a really good start. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that support. And if I could just mention that we have a report called State of the Region that is looking at the region now, today. It has another element to it, which is looking at the lives of women and girls as well. So we're hoping that can be sort of an empirical resource. So the state of the region today, and then hopefully in 2 or 3 years' time, and then moving forward what we want to achieve.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just following on that, I think following on from the last speaker, one of the key things for me, I know for many people, is early intervention in terms of our young people. It's crucial. We know there's been huge underfunding for a long time. We've seen some funding coming back. It's nowhere near making up for where we've been, but it's good and welcome that extra funding coming in. Be very interested in understanding your views from a region and in terms of your position, how again you can influence that, and what we could look at across the region to enhance those facilities for mothers, for children, for fathers, for parents. That is, we know what happens without early intervention. We know the whole range of things, and it's crucial for equality of opportunity, health outcomes, education, and of course stopping some of our young people getting into a position where they feel they've got no stake in society. So be really interested in hearing your views around that.
I mean, this could be a long conversation, couldn't it, about early intervention making a difference in our society. But certainly the 2 years I spent in the shadow education team in Parliament as the early years minister, I have seen fantastic examples of how early intervention makes a massive difference. And certainly my approach to the police and crime plan is that we are not necessarily only there to scoop up after the crime has happened, but we must try and do all we can to get further upstream. So I've working with the really fantastic Office of Police and Crime, and as I say, Alison Lowe, my deputy, we've got a strategy to try and put in place that early intervention, that diversion, that opportunity to make lives better. Now, I don't have powers over sort of early years across West Yorkshire. So Sure Starts, whether I can introduce those or not, but I have powers of persuasion, and some councils have the money to continue their youth services. I met with Young in COVID in Bradford, doing absolutely spectacular work a couple of weeks ago, how they're pivoting young people away from lives of crime and poverty. I think trying to get to families when their babies are small is the way you do it. Now, we've seen, haven't we, during COVID, that our nurseries and our early years practitioners have been devastated because families who are working from home then don't need childcare or can't afford it because they've lost their jobs. So there has been a real shake-up of the sector, not supported by government and their 30 hours of free childcare offer, where you saw a real demarcation in some nurseries where, I mean, we're slightly off topic here, but some nurseries where there are children whose parents could afford to pay extra for a nursery lunch, and those parents who couldn't and brought in a packed lunch, a donut or a bag of crisps on separate tables. And, you know, we need to really try and bring communities together. Just to finally say, I think co-ops are the way forward as well, that can help us with that early intervention. And as a labour and cooperative mayor, it's something I've seen in practice, and it comes from the community up, and it will get support from me and my office. We're looking at how we can support co-ops across the region.
Very quickly, I would certainly agree with encouraging co-ops and social enterprises, mutual organisations, and absolutely, if you as the mayor and through the funds that you have can support that, I think that will make a significant difference. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thank you. I spent 30 years working with a mutual organisation. I think they're the future. Well, they should. We couldn't use gain share to top up revenue underspending, could we?
No, the gain share was part of the devolution deal for additionality. It was about we will be assessed on how it's been used to grow the economy, to do good things. It unfortunately, or fortunately, perhaps, can't be used to just fill holes in budget.
And do we produce an annual report as to how it's been spent? And if so, who reviews that then? Is it just go to the authority rather than somebody at the central government or some audit organisation look through it?
Internally, we're monitoring it, obviously, through the Finance Resources Committee and the Combined Authority. In terms of externally, there is a 5-year gateway process managed by government. They have yet to set out how they will go about it, but there is a 5-year gateway where we have to demonstrate what outcomes we've achieved with the funding. Be clear, we've adhered, as Ben referenced before, to our assurance framework in making the decisions about how to invest the funding. So that will be coming through in 3 years' time, the first of those gain share reviews.
So after 5 years, there'll be an independent review report on how it's been spent and presumably independent comments and recommendations.
We are waiting to hear what the shape of it is, but yes, we expect there'll be some form of written report that would be able to.
But we're still in the first of those 5 years, so that's well over the horizon then, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Thank you. Any other questions on game? Jeff, go on.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think it crosses into the budget, but I think it's linked. I'm just wondering, we talked about priorities. To what extent are the priorities determined in discussion with the constituent authorities? I'm just trying to get a feel for whether there's a sort of strategic alignment between the priorities of WICA and the priorities of the various authorities, and whether that's reflected and picked up in the budget setting process.
Thanks for that question. Absolutely. And working with other leaders across the region, I've been able to go out to the regions and work with the leaders and their colleagues, talking through the mayoral pledges and how they cross over into the priorities for their communities. And there is so much equivalence. You won't be surprised to know that Kirklees, for example, or Bradford, we share absolutely the same priorities, and then to discuss what they need from me in order for us to all deliver. So for example, a council will need greater housing, access to greater housing for maybe it's older residents. We can work together how that can be added on to the 5,000 affordable homes. You know, how can we work together to make the priorities happen? I do think it is very helpful having a mayor. Devolution has made a massive difference for local authorities. And certainly when we think about the city region funding, we wouldn't have had access to that without having a mayor. So it is an opportunity for councils to work with work together to deliver on their priorities on the ground. They know their communities better than me, and so it's working together on that shared agenda.
So just to clarify, that there are sort of like active ongoing discussions as part of WICA's budget round with the other authorities.
That's absolutely right. Politically, at a political level, but with officers, yeah. Ben, sorry.
Thank you. No, just to add, Councillor Winard, that of course the 5 West Yorkshire leaders sit on the combined authority, and with them indeed are the combined authority with the balancing members, and so there's a real opportunity there to align the local authority objectives with the combined authorities objectives, and of course that goes for not only for the policies but for the approval of the mayor's budget as well. So the partnership between the local authorities and the combined authority is kind of deep set into the process, and I think as we discussed when we were talking before the devolution deal was turned into legislation, that the system works very well if the local authorities and the combined authority are all aligned and working together. It's very easy to gum that system up if there's disagreement.
So will there be a paper at some stage to the Executive Board or Leeds City Council and the other 4 saying these are the discussions that have taken place with West Yorkshire Combined Authority and these are the effects that those discussions have had on our budget? Where does that sort of discussion surface so that we could read it?
So I think the mechanism by which it surfaces is through the combined authority papers and the strategy documents, the budget documents that emerge through the combined authority result as they're an output from those discussions. So that's the kind of output point. And often, as you'll be aware, combined authority papers take documents before they're fully finished for discussion and for debate.
So we'll read the combined authority papers for December and there'll be some discussion of the budget one. Yeah. Any other questions on gain share? We can move slightly to the side and look at budgets then. How far are we on the budget setting for 22, 23? Have we got an outline? Angela's looking. I expected that.
Yeah,
how far have we got?
We have got to a point in the budget. It's been a very, very difficult year to set a budget. Our biggest revenue income is the transport levy. Our transport levy is largely spent on with the bus operators on concessionary travel and tendered services. And clearly the bus industry has been in a complete state of flux since the beginning of the pandemic. So our usual skill at forecasting upcoming costs has been severely challenged this year because the bus industry is running in a completely different way and is going to be funded differently going forward. So we have been making some assumptions in order to build up the building blocks of the budget. So the Finance Resources Committee has been looking at the need to maintain the transport levy, for example, at the point it is. That won't allow growth, but it will hopefully allow us to sustain the network. And we hope that further funding will come through the bus service improvement plan, the enhanced partnership work that the mayor's been leading on. Our other income, we have been hoping to get some clarity through comprehensive spending review for future funding, for example, for LEPs, because we run our combined authority and LEP hand in hand. We still don't know about LEP funding for next year. We don't know about the UK shared prosperity funding for next year. So that gives us some real challenges about how some of the current projects and interventions that we fund through European funding and other means, some of those come to an end. We don't know what we're going to have to replace them. So my long answer to your very straightforward question, how's the budget going, is it's building up layers. We are hopeful to get to a point where it is balanced. It may need a bit of use of reserves. It may need some of the capacity that we're talking about through gain share, may need an element of that within it to help cover some of the non-transport costs in particular. We're still in a point of recovering.
Sorry, I missed that. We're going to use gain share?
No, we are looking at whether some of the work that is going on to develop pipelines of projects, for example, is going to be used across the partner authorities, ourselves included. You'll recall the Mayor set out what we spent last year. We used some of the gain share, perhaps not in the way it was intended to, but for the elections, because we have to bear the cost of the mayoral elections and we have no other funding for that. So there's been a small element of that has crept into our budget. We've also had mayoral capacity funding from central government. We don't yet know if that will continue in future years. All combined authorities have had that. So there's still a number of question marks. So we're building up a budget that, depending how some of these decisions go, we should get close to being balanced. We may need to use a small amount of reserves to get us through. One of our biggest risks is really around the transport funding, which I think that the Transport Scrutiny Committee, I'm sure, will be very much focused on. But there are lots of risks next year in bus funding. So we are seeking to make sure the funding we do have from the transport levy that is also spent on funding our bus stations, our passenger information, all the other parts of public transport that we do, that we make sure that we are able to harness that to best effect, and where, if we can find any small opportunities to reduce any payments, that's held ready for response next year, when we think bus operators will find it challenging to continue to run all the routes that they do currently run on a commercial basis.
Is it right to say that there's no further opportunity for negotiation with the central government about our funding for next year? What we're going to get next year has been established and is not subject to any more lobbying or anything like that. Is that fair? And if so, who would be doing it?
I think there is considerable negotiation still to be undertaken over the remainder of this financial year ahead of budgets for 22-23, and that's because although we have for some funding streams we have an indicative outline. So the Mayor referenced earlier City Region Sustainable Transport Fund. We know what the totality figure is, but we don't know what the breakup of that funding will be. So there's negotiation there. We still have a live bidding process for something called the Bus Service Improvement Plan. Again, funding that will start from next financial year, but that's still very much a live process. And then there are still unknowns for things that we would hope that government will still fund, or will make it clear how the funding will work, of which Shared Prosperity Fund, the successor to former EU funds, for which local authorities and ourselves were major spenders in the past, still quite uncertain about how that's going to work. So I think I'm echoing Angela's points that there are a number of uncertainties that are still at this point unknown.
If I may just comment, though, that there was work done on the equivalence of European funding and the government's new Shared Prosperity Fund, and it is not the same, it is much less. So, it is very, very frustrating that we are in a position where there's so many moving parts and we're so reliant on government and their decision making, and so many weeks were spent where we wanted to make decisions but we couldn't because we were waiting for the budget. So a lot of the ebb and flow of it is about government timings.
Will you be involved in those negotiations, if that's the right word? Will you be making our case to the Treasury or whoever the people in Whitehall are? At
every opportunity I make the case for West Yorkshire, so I'll be in the room, don't worry.
I should have done that. Sorry, thank you. Thank you.
May I add just an addition to that answer, which is we probably haven't discussed as much as we should have done in this conversation the role of the combined authorities subcommittees. And each of those is led by the leader of one of the local authorities with a private sector let member alongside. Not only will they do some of the thinking about policy development and objectives, but they'll also be part of that making the case, and the work for those committees therefore needs a reference, I think.
Thank you. We've not left ourselves much time, but the one of your 10 priorities was equality, diversity and inclusion. And we've not really reached that yet. Is there anything you want to tell us about that, or any questions that people want? Well, we'll start with questions. Josh.
Oh yes, thank you, Chair. It was really just regarding, obviously we've got this gain share funding. To what extent can we use that as leverage to initiate wider change? And what I mean by that is when a partner, when somebody comes forward for funding, I think, Ben, you mentioned that we're mandated by government to have an assurance framework. To what extent is there an ESG framework in essentially mandating our partners to have ESG priorities, you know, whether it's anti-slavery declarations, UN sustainability goals, signing up to those? To what extent do we, number one, consider those as important with our partners, but also number two, requiring ESG priorities? Thank you.
Everybody else knows what that means but me. What ESG one?
Environment, social governance. So it's very much, you know, equality, diversity, climate change.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. And I've put EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, at the heart of everything that we're doing, every decision that we make. We didn't have an equality and diversity and inclusion officer in the combined authority. We do now. We have various groups that in the last 6 months, we've established Embrace, which is our Black members of staff, Proud at WICA, which is our LGBT group, and the Gender Equality Staff Network groups. We're all undertaking training on equality and diversity, and the impact assessments that we that every decision we make, how does that impact our EDI? Also, there is already an assessment against the equality framework for local government. I think that's already been in place, hasn't it, for quite some time. But certainly my inclusivity champion, the focus on EDI, and certainly in the police and crime work that we're doing is, hopefully you will see as the months roll on, the impact that that's going to have. And I really am aware as well that we have to get our own house in order. So we're doing a lot of work within the combined authority itself, working with partners and working with council leaders and councillors to look as well at where our diversity is. And also I'm very proud to say that our LEP board is one of the most diverse in the country. I've made every chair of the committees look very hard at their diversity, who they invite onto their boards. The culture committee, I'm proud it's diverse, but we're going to go further. We have to speak for everyone in our region and include everyone in our decision making. So I'm glad you've raised it, because it's something that's very important to me. Ben.
Just to add, if I may, this operates on at least 3 levels. So you're absolutely right that the starting point is that all of the policies are subject to kind of gateway tests to ensure that not just that the impacts are understood, but that they're furthering the opportunities and the KPIs that we set around ESG objectives. Yes, we do require that in terms of our partners and through our contractors, through things like procurement. When we have active programs, we then also often require it for those, say, for example, in terms of business support, companies that are coming to us for grants or loans, we'll be requiring them to meet certain standards as well. So yes, it is built in. What we need to do is make sure that that is elevated so that it's very visible and you can see exactly what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you.
If I may add just an example, the entrepreneur scheme that we've allocated £6 million to, we have seen the evidence is there that women, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic entrepreneurs and small businesses don't get the same chances. So we've been able to say 50% of the people on this scheme will be women, 20% will be Black, Asian, minority ethnic, and 3% disabled. And this is going to be a challenge. They are the furthest away from the access to money and venture capital. So it's in 3 streams where people who have just got an idea, you can really encourage them to go through the process. So we're really hopeful that that will have an impact as well on growth across our region.
Thank you. Megan and then Jeanette, and then we're going to have to wind up because if we don't get out by 12 o'clock, horrible things happen, don't they?
Sorry?
Carol, I'm sorry. Carol, Megan, right.
Thank you.
Carol, sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm in the wrong place.
Coming from Bradford, the youngest city that we've got, how are you going to have a look? You're obviously doing the EDI part of it, but how are we looking and listening at the voice of the child, who obviously are going to be the future of our authority?
Well, can I just say that you do brilliant work in Bradford, born in Bradford. The work that you do with mothers and babies is exceptional. I am frustrated particularly about that stop in Bradford because the youngest city in the country has now no access, swift access to Leeds and Manchester, Sheffield, elsewhere. Really important. Obviously, early years or children's services are not my remit, but I know that Kirsten and Susan put the children at the heart of their focus in Bradford, and certainly the work that Born in Bradford has done, I would like to see rolled out because it is exceptional across the region. Also supporting the bid for City of Culture in Bradford 2025. Well-being and family time is really important. And I think what your plans are in Bradford around that and the family focus has been second to none.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I shouldn't take my glasses off when I'm trying to read things like that. Do apologise. Jeanette.
Thank you. It's a question about you, really. So you've been in post 6 months. I guess you faced quite a lot of challenges. Do you think that sort of organisationally now you're in shape for taking the whole agenda forward for the region, and what more needs to be done? Because it's a lot of front-facing stuff, but without a really good team behind you, it will just be a title.
I am so proud of the combined authority and the officers and the councillors that work for our region. As you know, I came into local government 6 months ago, so my learning curve has been steep. However, whilst there are things that need to be changed, the things we could do more with more agility, looking at HR, like I said, about diversity and inclusion. There's lots of things that are moving to a better place. Our comms team, I think, was a challenge early on because we hadn't had a mayor before, and that exactly what you've said about that public facing role suddenly had to change to less marketing and more press approach. So that was challenging, but there will be ongoing challenges. And I'm sure if we were meeting again in 3 years' time, there would be other challenges. But I just want to put on record how, given COVID, given the economic pressure, given everything that we've had to go through over the last 6 months, I am so grateful for the smarts of the officers and my colleagues across the region to help me get to that point. But when you say it's just going to be a role, that was your words, wasn't it? Well, yes, it is a public facing role, and it is an ambassador and a champion and an international advocate and a voice. So, for example, being able to go to COP and speak with other international mayors from across the world to learn their good ideas, to develop those relationships. It's really important to be with the other northern mayors, to have greater leverage to get into government. Yeah, there is a role to it, and it is something that we need to keep making the case and be heard by the press so that our message gets through. But it is also about the hard graft. in the, in the day-to-day, which is decision making and strategy, prioritization and so on. It is the most amazing job. And I have to say, if everybody knew how great being a mayor was, they'd all want to do it. It is fantastic to be able to have power and money to support your region. So whilst there have been the odd bump in the road, I think the six months that we've had together as a combined authority has been very successful, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now,
Just to
I
go
was going
back, and the question was, do you think you're well enough supported in that role? What needs to change organisationally to make that better?
I
keep
would
the
say in the
answer down to
first few months, it was
15
difficult
seconds.
because I didn't have my team around me. But now, over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 months, having a chief of staff made a massive difference, so that everybody was coming to me for decisions. And now having the amazing Mike that's sat over there, that structure is now in place. And to have a chief of staff was vital. And to have a political advisor, obviously, to deal with anything political that comes with the mayoral role is also helpful. And both of those roles took quite some time to recruit for. So now we're in a good place.
Thank you. I see we're in danger of overrunning, which is not legal. But as Jacob hasn't spoken yet, and now wish to make an extremely brief 15-second comment.
Thank you.
Jacob.
It's just a corporate one, and one of your pledges was the living wage for the region. But I just note that according to the foundation website, WICA isn't actually accredited, and there's 4 of our constituent authorities aren't either. So how much progress is being made on that and getting accreditation? Because I think that's going to be really important, being able to flex that soft power to external businesses and organisations.
Thanks so much. And we're going out to consultation on that. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Angela.
Yeah, thank you. We're just putting together the plan that is needed to apply for accreditation. As I'm sure many of you are aware, it's not just about paying your own workers, it's about going through the supply chain. And I think that's one of the challenges, particularly it makes it difficult for our local authority partners. But we are on track to go forward with it quite soon. We've just had to pause slightly while we align ourselves with the police position, because the change that came in this year in terms of us taking on policing contracts as well. We just need to make sure we're consistent across the piece, but we are going forward with it, and we should have some good news on that very shortly.
Thank you very much. I think that's where we have to draw a line. I think you said you'd get back to Jacob on that. Is that you're going to give more details? You perhaps need more details on that. So if you wish to be in touch with Angela.
No, I'd really like to hear more about it and see how you get on. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody for the questions. Thank you for the answers as well, which were briefer than we meet in some forums. They were very useful sometimes as well, which all the time, of course. We meet again in February, January, when we hope we'll be able to see each other. We don't have this ridiculous 20 yards, whatever it is, between speaker and the other end of the table. Thank you very much indeed. We will see you again next year, but we reserve the right to invite you to meetings in between. Thank you very much. Meeting closed.
Thank you, Chair, for such a warm welcome. Thank you.